Cabinetry is something that a lot of people seem to be very intimidated by. And I think a lot of people don't fully understand a efficient, good process in order to build that cabinet. I'm going to be taking you through the steps of breaking down a full sheet of plywood and all of the steps that I go through to get all of those pieces ready to be assembled as a cabinet. First thing I want to show you is an idea of what it is exactly that I'll be building. We have an entire row of base cabinets down here. We have 1, 2, 3 that are going to be open up, have maybe an adjustable shelf, have a couple of doors. And then we have 1, 2, 3, 4 that are going to have 3 drawers each. Now, what I have here is just one sheet of my cut list. I use a program called Cut List Optimizer. I've talked about it in previous videos. But what's great about this is that this gives me an opportunity before I even start to know how I want to break down my sheets of plywood. It also tells me exactly how many sheets I'm going to need because each sheet is broken down. When I look at this, there is only one thing that I'm concerned with, and that is my rip cuts. Now, if you're wondering why I like to focus on ripping first, ripping is the very first step in the process. I want to rip every single sheet. So then that way, once I'm done ripping every single sheet, I can move on to the next step in the process. Rip it, full 8-foot long piece, and I'm going to set it off to the side. Now, the first thing I like to do on any sheet of plywood is I like to rip off the edge of the plywood. I just take about 6 millimeters or so off. The reason why is because if you're going to edge band these cabinets, that's not a good surface for you to apply your edge banding to. And in a lot of cases, depending on the edge banding you're using, especially if you're using very cheap and expensive edge banding, you're going to see that edge. So what am I doing? I am establishing a clean reference edge. Right now, we're going to go through this process. So let me go ahead and make this cut, and then we'll move on to the next part. If you were able to be here and see the difference between this cut edge or this non-cut edge, the factory edge, and the cut edge, it's substantially different. Now, before I make any adjustments, one thing that I'm going to do is I take a permanent marker and I just mark this edge, because this is my reference edge, with a black X, and that'll be important when we get into the next step. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and adjust my parallel guides to the width that I need. So I need 726. This is where I'm going to go just a little bit over that because my final pass will be over at the table saw. 726, we'll go with 730, and my track is in place, and now I can go ahead and make this next rip cut. The second step that I take is I actually go ahead and edge band all of my long ripped panels. I would rather do 7 long pieces than do 25 shorter pieces. And this is especially true if you're going to be using press-on, if you're going to be using iron-on, however you decide to apply it. All you have to do is ask yourself, how many times do you want to apply that? And the final reason is because now if this already has the edge banding on it, when I cross-cut everything to make my panels the proper length that I want them to be, it cuts the edge banding super clean. So I don't have to worry about trimming a bunch of edges. I'm trimming it as I cut. Now, before I edge banded, I mentioned that I would always mark my cut edge, which for me is my reference edge on all subsequent cuts. I'd mark it with an X. Well, another one of the big reasons why I like edge banding these long strips right off the bat is because now I always know what my reference edge is because it's edge banded. So that is the thing that's always going to go against the fence for all of my subsequent cuts, and I don't have to keep track of anything anymore. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and start cutting these down, and I know I'm going to get 3 panels on each one of these long ripped pieces. What I like to do for my first cut, I'm going to cut that one a little bit long. The reason I do that is because just like I took off the factory edge with my first cut, I need to do the same thing with the factory edge at the top or the bottom of the cabinet. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this first piece. I'll move this off to the side. I'll flip this over. I'll cut it to its final length, and then every one after that just comes in and the process just goes pretty quick. So we'll go ahead and flip this over, put the stop down. I've got a little bit to cut off here, and let me just actually take this as an opportunity just to see. So I've got just under 5 millimeters here, and I've got just a little bit more than that at the top. Right now, that factory edge is not a square edge, so I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that right now. This panel is now done. Time to move on to the other panels. The next step in my process is I go and I rip everything to the final width, whatever the depth of the cabinet would be. This doesn't take a lot of time. And the other thing too is the reason why I like doing it like this is because the very next step, I need all of the panels because I'm going to cut all of my grooves in all of my panels, the side panels and the bottom panel, and that will accept the back panel that is actually going to go inside of the cabinet. So while I'm here, I just go ahead and do both. So I'm going to go ahead and get everything ripped to the final width. Next, I'm going to go ahead and set up my table saw to cut the grooves. I'm using a 1/4 inch dado stack, 6 mil. And the way that I like to do my stretchers, which you'll see once I get to the assembly portion, is I like to use the material that I'm using for the stretchers, in this case, the exact same plywood, and that's going to be my spacing. So I'm going to cut all of these grooves and we'll move on to the next step. I like to take this opportunity to punch any of my holes that I might need for shelf pins. Not only punch out my shelf pin holes, but also where my hinge plates are going to be, because typically I'll build frameless cabinets or use European style hinges. So this allows me the ability to do that now, so I don't have to try to worry about that after I get everything assembled. Now, I do this not only for the shelf pin and hinge locations, but typically I will also pre-drill all of my hole locations for my drawer slides. And the advantage to that is that when I assemble this cabinet, everything is already there. From there, I can throw in all my hardware and not have to worry about jigs and spacers and pre-drilling and all of the things that make that process very difficult. All of my cabinet pieces are now completely done. The only thing left to do at this point is just put all of these boxes together. I've got a little secret for all of you. You don't have to use glue when building cabinets. So the first thing that I do, I place it on something that I know is flat. In this case, I'm placing it on my MFT, and I'm going to move it kind of close out here to the edge. And I'm going to take one of my sides, and I'm just going to stand it up here like this. Now, what I'm trying to do is just make sure that the front is perfectly lined up. Once I know that front is perfectly lined up, I'm going to start using my narrow crown stapler. You could use a brad nailer or anything else. What I'm trying to do at this point is not fully assemble the cabinet. I'm just trying to get it together so it doesn't fall apart. I want to get everything lined up because I'm going to go back with something else. So I'm using a narrow crown staple, and I'm just going to go ahead and go away from the edge a little bit. Place one staple there. I know that that's lined up. I don't even need to check the back. I'm going to go to the back, make sure I'm applying downward pressure on that bottom just to make sure that it's nice and flat. I'm going to add another one back here, and then typically I'll go ahead and add one right around the middle. Now, as you can see, I can let that go. It's not super sturdy just yet. The reason why I like to use the narrow crown staple is I feel like it has substantially more holding power than a typical brad nail. Now what I'll do is I'll go ahead and spin this around, and I'll do the exact same thing with the other side. While I've still got this upright, the next piece that I like to add is this bottom stretcher or nailer, because it's actually going to be behind my panel when I add it, and that will actually be what I screw it into the wall with. I'll do the same exact thing to both sides, making sure that they're nice and flush. Now, I want to point out that I'm only putting two, and I'm actually putting them more towards the middle because I want to add a screw at the top and a screw at the bottom, and I'll show you all that here in just a minute. Now I'm going to go ahead and lay my cabinet to where it is on its back. I will take my next nailer and I will place it so it's nice and flush. You'll notice that it lines up perfectly with my groove. It's directly behind where I'm going to slide the panel in once it's all assembled. From there, I'll go ahead and tip it up. Next thing I want to do is go ahead and put my top stretcher with my edge banding out towards me. Make sure everything is nice and lined up, and I'll follow the same steps. Finally, I'm going to lay it down flat, turn it back up towards me, and I'm going to put my stretcher that goes across the top and actually is directly in front of where I'll slide the panel into. Next, I just like to lay out some lines on all the areas that I'm going to be drilling holes for my screws, and I want to go 3/8 of an inch. And it's not needed, you could eyeball it, but uniformity is just nice in my opinion. So I'm going to go ahead and draw a line there. This doesn't have to be really fancy because in most cases the sides of these cabinets are going to be not visible. So we'll go ahead and mark it right there. I'll do the same thing on the bottom. Same thing across here. And now I have a guide for my screws just to make sure everything looks nice and neat. What I'm going to use here is a countersink drill bit so I can make sure that the screw heads are exposed. Depending on the screws you use, you don't necessarily need to pre-drill. I just like to pre-drill. It works, and it gives me a little bit cleaner result. Now on the stretchers, I'm going to put two. I'm going to put one out more towards each end. Across the bottom, I'll put a total of 4, one in the back, one in the front, and then one in between where the existing crown staples are. Then I'll go ahead and pre-position all of my screws. The screw length that I like to use is 1.5 inches. And so what I'll do is I'll just go around, I'll tighten all these up. Now that side's done, I'll spin it around and I'll do the same thing on the other side. The last thing that I like to do is go ahead and attach this bottom panel from underneath to the stretcher, just in a couple of places, and I follow the exact same step as before. I just draw a quick reference line at 3/8 of an inch, so I'm splitting the material, and then I'm going to go ahead and just drill 3 holes. Prep my screws. Go ahead and lift this back up. We'll do a quick check for square, even though in all actuality it doesn't matter too much at this point. But I've got a nice square cabinet. Now I say it wouldn't really matter that much if it wasn't perfectly square at this point, because when I go to install these, whatever my base cabinet is, that's my starting point, I'll do everything I can do to make sure that that is square, and then I'll build off of that. As you can see, I just put this cabinet together in a matter of a couple of minutes. I didn't use any glue, I didn't use any clamps, and I didn't use any domino or biscuits or anything like that. Now, while there are some advantages to using dominoes or biscuits because it'll just help get everything aligned very quickly, it just really, in most cases, isn't totally necessary. Now, the only thing we have left to do is put in the back panel and this cabinet is done. Once that's in, the final thing that I'll do is I'll just run a couple of narrow crown staples just in the back, just to keep that in place. And there we have it. We have a strong, sturdy cabinet that is never going to fail. I didn't use any glue. On this application, it wouldn't matter anyway. If you're using pre-finished plywood, the glue isn't going to stick to it. So I've built cabinets like this many, many times. I've never had a failure. Stop overcomplicating it and just build it like this. It's going to save you a lot of time. It's going to save you a lot of headaches, and it's going to be a lot faster. Thanks.